Hello everybody and welcome to the testing grounds, my oxygen not included sandbox base where I test out various builds, try out various ideas, and when I think they're ready for the prime time, show them off to you guys. So what do we have today? What we have today is this very simple system over here. It's a liquid pump connected to a liquid valve. This liquid valve is set to 70 grams per second. Other values work as well, but it needs to be small basically. And then we have a liquid vent right here, which is where the water exits. Pretty simple. I've hooked up the power like so. And this little build right here, it's going to convert any gas that I have down here into any gas that I have up here. Let's watch this bad boy in action. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, we're getting some natural gas here. This started at 200 grams per tile. This started at 20 kilograms per tile. And so the flow rate is pretty good here. Good conversion rate between our polluted oxygen and natural gas. And you're probably looking at this and saying, that's not possible. That shouldn't work. What's going on? And you're right, this shouldn't work. It is in fact an exploit. And that's what this episode is going to be about, discussing exploits and builds and sort of my philosophy towards them and whether or not it makes sense to include builds that have exploits in this sort of guide tutorial series. And I think the answer to that is that it's going to vary. If I showed no builds that could be considered exploits at all, I think a lot of people would say, well, why don't you just do X, right? X is so much easier. It's a nice, clever way of accomplishing this. And if I say, oh, well, I think that's an exploit, people say, well, I don't want to use that build because I don't think that's an exploit and I'm going to go do this. Meanwhile, if I sort of do the opposite and I show a lot of exploity things in the builds, a lot of people are going to say, well, I don't want to use that in my build because that's an exploit, right? That's not something that I want to abuse. And so we run into sort of this problem that we need to find a happy middle ground. And the truth is that I'm going to show you builds that I consider exploits, and I'm going to show you builds that I don't consider exploits that you might disagree with, right? It's just sort of one of the inevitable things that can happen with a build such guide, such tutorial, whatever series. We're going to have disagreements. This, I hope there is no disagreement. For those of you who don't understand how this works, basically what's happening is I'm taking this tile and I'm toggling it between vacuum and not vacuum. This is what this entire build is just doing. It's creating a way to toggle on and off one tile from being a vacuum, and then we have that tile exposed to the gas up top that we want to have the gas in the bottom converted to, and then we have it exposed to the gas that we're converting, right? And basically what happens is, in the past, whenever this vacuum occurred, the gases that occupied this that kind of rushed in to try and fill this, right? And basically what's happening is during this toggling, gases are saying, oh, I should flow down here. Those gases are forced back into their respective tiles. However, the game can't have gases of different types on the same tiles. So any polluted oxygen that gets forced out up top is going to be converted into natural gas. In the past, what happened was that they just deleted the gas. They said, okay, this gas can't be here, delete it. And there were a variety of complaints relating to gas being deleted by doors closing and opening, which causes a vacuum, gases being deleted by wheeze-warts, which create a vacuum, gases being deleted by deodorizers. There were a lot of sort of incidental uses of vacuum creating technology, perfectly innocent, that weren't designed to try and abuse this mechanic, that were deleting a lot of gas from people's bases. KLEI figured the lesser of two evils would be this. Instead of deleting the gas that would be pushed into the wrong element, they just convert the gas to that element. Of course, it allows now for these sort of matter conversion chambers, and basically this process will continue. Here we are up to 5 kilograms. This process will continue as this thing is built until this area has twice the pressure of this area down here, right? At that point, we'll sort of get an equal amount of natural gas and polluted oxygen trying to get into this tile. And when it forces things back out, it isn't actually going to change, right, what goes on. But the way it's set up, it's only going to convert things one way. I want to emphasize that. That basically in the core of how the game works, There's something about the directions that it checks first, and that makes it so that this one sort of has priority. In any case, this is very clearly an exploit. I want to say that. But it's difficult because I'm not going to show you builds that are just very blatantly exploits like this. I don't think that's my plan. I might show them so that you're aware of them because, again, this is something that could very easily impact other builds and estimations of their efficiency, right? I might have another build that through some other process, deodorizers, Weezewarts, whatever, creates a vacuum, and then we have to seriously ask the question, well, is the reason the build is working this exploit? Is there some element that it's adding? Or maybe that isn't what lets the build work, but is that what adds to its efficiency, right? If I have some system whereby I'm converting polluted oxygen to oxygen with a bunch of deodorizers, maybe part of the reason why the system is so efficient is that the deodorizers are creating a vacuum and thus doing this little conversion trick. It's problematic, right? It's troublesome. But I want to discuss it particularly in the context of the last build that I showed, right? Because I kind of predicted that I would get comments about whether or not this is an exploit. And here is my take on this sort of liquid oxygen condenser. I don't believe that this flow throttling mechanic, this pipe mechanic, is unintended. I believe this is intended by the developers. It seems to me that it would be easier to code a system whereby phase change breaks pipes always than phase change breaks pipes unless they have less than the amount in the pipe that would be necessary to break a gas pipe, right? Basically, it says, look, it's fine to run these as gas pipes, just don't have more material in them than you would be able to get into a gas pipe, and we'll allow it. Where it kind of becomes an exploit is if I were to take my liquid oxygen tank and start fueling it up from this flow, right? Because now I'm filling my liquid oxygen tank with a bunch of oxygen that is very clearly not a liquid anymore, right? So this build, this condenser build, seems to me like it's perfectly fine if I were using it to, say, convert polluted oxygen into oxygen, right? We could be doing that. We could be pumping in a bunch of polluted oxygen. We could be having it condense and convert. It probably would disinfect it at the same time because the cold temperatures would get rid of the germs. That would be fine. Using it to fuel a liquid oxidizer tank is probably cheaty, right? That the bug here, the sort of the exploit is not that these pipes should break. The exploit is that this liquid oxidizer tank should check to see whether or not the correct temperature has been met before it accepts the oxygen into its tank. That is my view of it. But other people will look at it differently. And other people will say this entire pipe mechanic is an exploit, and therefore not just this build, but also the sour gas condensers that you showed are also exploits. Again, it's going to be a tricky thing. There's going to be things like pulsed liquid tepidizers, which I believe are an exploit. There are going to be things, here's one that I think a lot of people would say is not an exploit, that I do believe is an exploit. That is tricking like liquid vents into thinking that there's, or tricking like gas vents into thinking that there's room for more gas by putting just a little bit of liquid over them, right? Then it says there's no gas on the tile, I can still pump out, but the rest of the gas is pressurized to like 150 kilograms per tile. I think the game intends you to use gas reservoirs if you want to store 150 kilograms of gas and not just a single tile, right? But I'm going to get comments, I'm sure, from a lot of people that say, why are you using all this stuff? Why don't you just compress it all into a super compressed gas chamber? Again, I want to emphasize, there are things that we can all agree are exploits. Some people will want to build with them. I personally don't. In my Let's Play, I try and avoid at all costs every sort of exploit in the game. But there are things that we're going to have disagreements on as to whether or not they're exploits, like this pipe system, like perhaps whether or not you can put liquid oxygen into a liquid oxidizer tank. Is that an exploit? Right? We're going to have disagreements, and I just want to say that if you have significant concerns with a build, if you say, I like it, but not for these few elements, go ahead and leave a comment. and I can try and come up with versions of the build that don't use whatever mechanic you find exploity. But do be aware that it's too difficult of a line to walk. This sort of balance between trying to create builds that people will use and take greatest advantage of all of the mechanics available in the game, but also using builds that no one will ever consider as exploits, right? That's it for this episode. Hope this has been informative. Hope at least you got one little cool thing out of it, which is that you can convert any gas into any other gas, right? I can replace this with carbon dioxide and this with oxygen, or vice versa. I can turn carbon dioxide straight into oxygen. Interestingly, if you really want to go whole ham with this build, you could have a really high temperature version, right? You could try and design a really high temperature version where you take something like oxygen, right, and convert it into gold gas and do real alchemy where you just are able to convert any gas into gold because you've heated the gold up to its evaporation point. That might actually be one of the next things that I work on, showing you how to get to super high temperatures. If you want to boil steel, you can boil steel in this game in survival mode. You don't need dev tools to do it. It's a long and arduous process, but it is doable. In any case, that's it for this episode. I'll catch you guys next time.